My parents handed my older brother the deed to a $3.6 million Miami mansion, then tossed a rusted, dirt-caked key to a broken Alaskan cabin at my plate. My fiancé took one look at that rusty key, called me a pathetic loser, and left me right there at the dinner table. In my despair, I traveled to that freezing cabin to sell it for scrap wood. But what I found buried beneath the ice was worth $67 million. And the family that threw me away was about to lose absolutely everything. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a family who underestimated your worth. The $3.6 million Miami estate is yours, son, for your growing family. My mother Brenda slid a heavy gold-embossed deed across the white linen tablecloth. We were sitting in the private dining room of the most exclusive steakhouse in Atlanta. The ambient lighting caught the metallic lettering on the document, making it gleam like a championship trophy. The air smelled of seared ribeye truffle butter and the heavy, expensive perfume my mother wore like a suit of armor. My older brother Jamal picked up the deed with a practiced, arrogant smirk. Beside him, his white wife Chloe let out a perfectly rehearsed gasp of delight, her manicured hands flying to her chest as she leaned in to kiss his cheek. "The family is so proud of you, Jamal," my mother continued, raising her glass of vintage champagne. "You are building a legacy that elevates the Washington name." I sat directly across from them, my hands resting quietly in my lap. I did not say a word. I simply waited for the other shoe to drop. In my family, there was always another shoe, and it was usually aimed directly at my head. My father, Calvin, cleared his throat, adjusting the cuffs of his tailored suit. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out something small and jagged. He did not hand it to me politely. He tossed it. The object hit the glass table with a dull, heavy clank, sliding past my wine glass and coming to a halt right in front of my plate. It was a key. It was not shiny or new. It was heavily rusted, completely caked with decades of dried dirt and attached to a faded, cracking plastic tag. "And for you, Zuri," my father said, his tone as casual as if he were asking the waiter for a refill on his water. "The Alaska cabin. We are distributing our assets while we are still alive, so we can enjoy our peace without any bitter arguments later." I stared down at the rusted piece of metal. I did not cry. I did not scream or flip the table. I simply calculated the absolute absurdity of the situation. I am 35 years old. I work as an environmental data analyst. I have a flawless credit score, a solid investment portfolio, and a career I built entirely from the ground up with zero financial help from the two people sitting across from me. Yet here I was being handed the literal scrapings of my family's generational wealth, a shack thousands of miles away that I had never even seen, while the golden child received a beachfront mansion in one of the most expensive real estate markets in the country. I looked up from the key and met my mother's eyes. A broken cabin in Alaska, sight unseen. I kept my voice perfectly level, refusing to give them the emotional reaction they were so clearly waiting to weaponize. Meanwhile, Jamal gets a multi-million-dollar estate in Miami. Are we really pretending this is an equitable distribution of family assets? My mother sighed, a harsh, dramatic sound designed to draw the attention of the waiter standing near the door. She adjusted her diamond necklace and looked at me with that familiar, suffocating mixture of pity and disdain. "Jamal is a visionary entrepreneur, Zuri. He needs the proper aesthetic to secure high-level investors for his business. He represents the family on a very public stage. You, on the other hand, have always been aggressively solitary. A cabin in the middle of nowhere suits your isolating nature perfectly." The absolute audacity of her statement hung heavy in the air. A visionary entrepreneur. Jamal had burned through 3 different startup ventures over the last decade. All of them had been secretly bailed out by my parents, while Jamal projected an image of massive self-made success on social media. My parents were entirely obsessed with maintaining a toxic facade of Black excellence within our elite Atlanta social circles. Jamal, with his charming smile and country club memberships, played the part of the flawless heir effortlessly. I had chosen a quiet life of science, data analysis, and environmental conservation. I did not attend their high society galas to network with politicians. I did not wear designer labels just to prove to strangers that I could afford them. And for that independence, I was constantly punished. I was the scapegoat, the daughter who refused to be a convenient prop in their perfect family narrative. "We are giving you a piece of property, Zuri," my father added, cutting into his steak without bothering to look up at me. Most children would simply say thank you. "Do not be ungrateful tonight. It is highly unbecoming." Chloe leaned forward, swirling the red wine in her crystal glass, a condescending smile playing on her lips. "You really should be thankful, Zuri. Jamal and I have to think about our future children, about protecting the legacy of the Washington name." A cabin in the frozen woods sounds so quaint for someone with your specific lifestyle. It is practically a favor. I felt the heat rising in my chest, a lifetime of slights and casual insults bubbling dangerously close to the surface. They were not giving me a cabin. They were giving me an insult. They were publicly declaring my worth to the family, and that worth amounted to a rusty piece of garbage for a freezing shack in the tundra. But the real gut punch of the evening was not the rusty key on the table. It was the man sitting right next to me. My fiancé, Trey. We had been engaged for 8 months. Trey ran a logistics tech startup that had been severely struggling to secure its second round of funding. He had been practically vibrating with excitement all week about this specific dinner, heavily implying to his friends that my parents would use this occasion to bestow a significant financial gift upon us, a gift he fully intended to funnel directly into his failing business to keep it afloat. I turned my head to look at Trey, expecting to see outrage on my behalf. I expected him to grab my hand under the table to tell my parents they were being incredibly disrespectful, to stand up for the woman he had promised to marry. Instead, Trey was staring at the rusted key with absolute horror. He slowly pulled his hand away from mine, sliding it off the table and resting it on his knee. His jaw was clenched so tightly that a muscle twitched furiously in his cheek. His eyes were dark, filled with a cold, calculating realization. The easy money he thought he was marrying into had just vanished into thin air. He did not look at me with love. He did not look at me with sympathy or protective anger toward my family. He looked at me with pure, unadulterated disgust. The silence at the table stretched so tightly I could hear the clinking of silverware from the private dining room next door. Trey had spent the last 6 months talking endlessly about our future empire. His tech logistics startup was bleeding cash, and he had made no secret of how much he was banking on my family recognizing our upcoming marriage with a substantial financial gift. He had mentally spent my inheritance before we even sat down to order appetizers. Now, looking at the rusted piece of metal sitting next to my plate, the illusion shattered. The calculating gleam in his dark eyes vanished, replaced by a cold, hard resentment. He shifted his chair back, the wood scraping loudly against the polished floor. I expected him to excuse himself, maybe pull me into the hallway to figure out a plan. Instead, he stood up right there in front of my parents and my brother. He reached for the heavy linen napkin resting on his lap and dropped it directly onto my half-eaten steak. "I cannot build an empire with a pathetic loser who cannot even secure her own family respect," he said. His voice was not raised, but the venom in it cut through the room sharper than the steak knives on the table. My breath caught in my throat, but I forced my face to remain completely impassive. I refused to give my parents the satisfaction of seeing me break. Trey reached down, grabbed my left hand, and forcefully slid the 2-carat diamond engagement ring off my finger. He did not hesitate. He did not look back. He slipped the ring into his suit pocket, turned on his heel, and walked straight out of the restaurant, leaving me completely alone in a room full of people who shared my blood, but wanted to see me bleed. The heavy wooden door clicked shut behind him. For a fraction of a second, the room was dead silent. Then Jamal threw his head back and let out a loud, booming laugh. It was the kind of laugh he used at his country club when someone told a joke at the expense of the waitstaff. Well, Jamal chuckled, wiping a fake tear from his eye. It looks like the visionary tech genius finally realized what a dead-end investment looks like. I told you Trey was too smart to stick around once the bank closed. My mother took a delicate sip of her champagne, her eyes gleaming with absolute triumph. She had orchestrated this perfectly. She knew exactly what Trey was after, and she knew exactly how to humiliate me in a way that would strip away the one piece of personal happiness I had managed to build outside her control. She wanted to prove that without the Washington family wealth I was nothing. "I think this calls for another toast," my father said, raising his glass toward Jamal. "To knowing your worth and cutting dead weight." I sat perfectly still. My heart was pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, but my mind was running pure cold data. I looked at the three people sitting across from me. These were the people who had gaslit me into believing my independence was a character flaw. The people who had just handed my brother a multi-million-dollar fortune while giving me a broken-down shack in Alaska just to remind me of my place. And they had cost me the man I was supposed to marry. Chloe, my sister-in-law, leaned across the table. Her blonde hair fell perfectly over her shoulders as she picked up the sleek leather checkbook the waiter had discreetly dropped off minutes ago. She did not even open it. She just slid it across the smooth glass table until it hit the rusted key sitting in front of me. "Since you have no wedding to pay for anymore," Chloe said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness, "you can cover dinner right. Consider it a congratulations gift for Jamal and me." The bill was $800. I knew because I had seen my father order 3 bottles of wine that cost more than my first car. They expected me to argue. They expected me to cry poverty to beg my father to cover it to show them how financially desperate I was without Trey and without a real inheritance. They wanted me to beg. I did not argue. I did not say a single word. I reached into my designer purse and pulled out my wallet. I slid out my sleek, heavy corporate black card, the one I had earned through years of relentless 80-hour work weeks managing global data systems. I placed it perfectly on top of the bill. The smug smiles on their faces faltered slightly at the sight of the heavy metal card. They had convinced themselves that my quiet life meant a lack of ambition. They assumed because I did not flaunt my wealth on social media like Jamal, I must be struggling. They had absolutely no idea what my net worth actually was, and I had no intention of telling them. I stood up, smoothing the front of my tailored dress. I picked up the rusted dirt-caked key and dropped it into my purse. "Enjoy the mansion, Jamal," I said, my voice eerily calm. "Make sure you check the foundation. Things built on lies tend to sink." I turned and walked out of the private dining room. I kept my shoulders pulled back and my spine perfectly straight. I felt their eyes burning into my back, but I did not stumble. I walked through the crowded main dining room past the staring patrons and the whispering hostesses until I pushed through the heavy glass doors and stepped out into the humid Atlanta night. The valet rushed over, seeing my expression, and immediately signaled for my car. I stood on the curb, the warm air wrapping around me, and took my first real breath of the evening. My left hand felt strange, incredibly light, without the weight of Trey's engagement ring. A wave of grief tried to push its way up my throat, but I shoved it down. There would be time to mourn the death of my relationship later. Right now, I needed to figure out exactly how to sever the final ties to my toxic family line. The valet pulled my car smoothly up to the curb. I handed him a generous tip and slid into the driver's seat. The leather was cool against my skin. I gripped the steering wheel, staring blankly at the glowing dashboard, wondering if I should just throw the rusted key into the nearest storm drain and block all of their numbers. Suddenly, the silence of the car was shattered by a sharp buzz. My phone lit up in the center console. I reached over, expecting a text from Trey, making some pathetic excuse, or a gloating message from Chloe. But it was not a message at all. It was a calendar notification flashing brightly across the screen. "Flight to Anchorage, 48 hours. I stared at the glowing letters. I had booked the flight weeks ago, when my father first casually mentioned he was transferring the Alaska property to my name. I had intended to go up there, assess the condition of whatever shack he was throwing my way, and sell it for scrapwood. I just wanted to liquidate the asset, close the chapter, and use the cash to finally buy the coastal property I had been eyeing. My thumb hovered over the cancel button. It would be so easy to just delete the trip, to forget the cabin, and never speak to the Washington family again. But a sharp, undeniable instinct flared in my chest. They wanted me to feel like a pathetic loser. They wanted me to walk away with nothing. I gripped the rusted key in my pocket. I was going to Alaska. I did not go back to the apartment I shared with Trey. I knew his frantic text messages and missed calls were already piling up on my locked screen. He would be demanding we talk, demanding I pay the rest of the lease, or attempting whatever pathetic pivot he thought would salvage his access to my bank accounts. I drove straight to a 24-hour premium hotel in downtown Atlanta, booked a corner suite, and spent exactly 45 minutes sleeping. The rest of the time, I packed a single heavy duffel bag and ran the numbers. My mind operates in datasets, risk assessments, and environmental variables. I applied that exact same cold, objective logic to my family. They were a toxic spill. They were a containment hazard. The only acceptable protocol was a complete and total purge. By dawn, I was sitting in the first-class lounge at Hartsfield-Jackson Airport, waiting for my flight to Anchorage. I opened my laptop and pulled up the public property records for the coordinates listed on that rusted key. The plot was substantial in acreage, but the listed property value was practically zero. It sat in a dead zone miles away from any developed infrastructure, surrounded by frozen earth and dense, unforgiving forest. My father had not just given me a piece of useless land. He had handed me a geographical insult. He wanted me to freeze both literally and financially. I drafted a quick, precise email to a local Alaskan land surveyor I found through a professional directory. I requested a rapid boundary assessment and a basic topographical scan so I could list the land for immediate sale. I did not care if I only got $5,000 for it. I wanted the cash, and I wanted the Washington name wiped from the deed forever. The flight was long, cold, and mercifully quiet. I spent the hours mapping out my new life. There would be no toxic mother demanding I shrink myself to make my brother look bigger. There would be no golden child brother draining my emotional resources while claiming to be a self-made titan. There would be no leech of a fiancé looking at my bank accounts like a venture capital fund. I landed in Anchorage under a blanket of heavy, oppressive gray clouds. The biting wind cut right through my designer wool coat the second I stepped out of the terminal. I bypassed the standard rental cars and secured a heavy-duty four-wheel drive truck equipped for the harsh, unforgiving terrain. I bought a thermos of black coffee, threw my duffel bag into the passenger seat, and started the grueling drive into the wilderness. The journey took hours. The smooth city pavement gave way to cracked asphalt, which eventually surrendered to a rugged, frost-heaved dirt road that rattled my teeth with every mile. Civilization stripped itself away piece by piece. The gas stations disappeared. The power lines vanished. The dense, towering pines closed in on both sides of the truck, casting long, jagged shadows across the frozen mud. My GPS signal began to flicker, struggling to place me on the map. This was not a place you came to build a cozy vacation home. This was a place you came to disappear. Finally, the GPS announced I had reached my destination just seconds before the screen went entirely blank. I threw the heavy truck into park and killed the engine. The silence that followed was absolute, heavy, and deeply isolating. I stepped out of the truck, the freezing air biting viciously at my exposed cheeks and tearing the breath from my lungs. My heavy boots crunched loudly against the hardened snow as I walked toward the structure my parents had so generously bestowed upon me. Calling it a cabin was a massive, generous exaggeration. It was a rotting, collapsed disaster of timber and rust. The roof had caved in completely on the left side, crushed under the weight of decades of accumulated snow and utter neglect. The windows were entirely shattered, leaving jagged teeth of glass framing the dark, exposed interior. The front door was hanging off a single rusted hinge, swaying slightly and groaning in the biting wind. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the rusted, dirt-caked key my father had tossed at my plate with such disdain. I looked down at the key, and then I looked up at the door that did not even possess a functioning lock mechanism. The sheer calculated cruelty of the gesture hit me all over again. They knew exactly what this place was. They had given me a ruined pile of garbage just to watch me realize I was worthless to them. I let out a sharp, humorless laugh. The sound vanished instantly into the vast, empty woods. I pulled out my phone, planning to snap a dozen high-resolution photos of the wreckage to send to a local broker who specialized in scrapwood and cheap hunting acreage. I unlocked the screen and noticed the cellular service bars dropping rapidly. 3 bars. 2 bars. The network was violently struggling to maintain a connection out here in the dead zone. I raised the camera, framing the collapsed roof against the slate-gray sky. Just as my finger hovered over the capture button, a notification banner dropped down across the top of my screen. It was a text message from the local surveyor I had emailed from the Atlanta airport. The message was frantic, completely devoid of the professional courtesy he had used in his previous emails. I read the words once, then read them again, my brow furrowing in deep analytical confusion. Miss Maya, do not sign anything, do not sell. They found out what is underneath. I stared at the glowing screen. My environmental data analyst brain immediately began firing on all cylinders, calculating probabilities and anomalies. What did he mean by what is underneath? Who exactly were they? Before I could type a rapid response demanding clarification, the single remaining bar of cellular service vanished. The no service icon flashed stubbornly in the top corner of my screen. I was completely cut off from the rest of the world. A sudden deep rumble broke the absolute silence of the frozen forest. It was not the sound of the wind whipping through the pines or the call of local wildlife. It was the heavy rhythmic growl of a massive, powerful engine. I turned around, my heart suddenly accelerating against my ribs. Down the narrow, nearly impassable dirt driveway I had just navigated, a vehicle was approaching. It was moving fast, chewing up the frozen mud and ice with aggressive, practiced precision. Within seconds, it breached the clearing. It was a sleek, black, heavily armored corporate SUV. Its windows were tinted so darkly they looked like solid slabs of obsidian. The vehicle gleamed unnaturally against the rugged, wild backdrop of the Alaskan woods. It looked exactly like a shark swimming into a shallow, quiet pond. The SUV did not park politely off to the side of the clearing. It pulled aggressively forward, the heavy off-road tires crunching loudly over the frost, and stopped horizontally right behind my rental truck. It intentionally and perfectly blocked my only exit from the property. I was boxed in. The engine of the SUV cut off. The sudden silence returning to the clearing felt incredibly dangerous and heavy. I slipped my phone into my coat pocket, zipped my collar up to my chin, and planted my boots firmly in the snow. I did not know who they were or what they wanted from me, but I was not the same woman who had sat quietly at that steakhouse table, accepting humiliation. My family had stripped away every single piece of my patience, my grace, and my politeness. I had absolutely nothing left to lose, and everything to figure out. I crossed my arms across my chest and waited for the tinted doors to open, entirely ready for a war. The heavy door of the black SUV clicked open, the sound sharp and metallic against the howling Alaskan wind. A man stepped out into the freezing air. He was wearing a pristine charcoal overcoat that probably cost more than my first car, paired with Italian leather boots that had absolutely no business touching frozen mud. He adjusted his lapels, appearing entirely unfazed by the sub-zero temperatures, and walked toward me with the relaxed, predatory stride of a man who made his living backing desperate people into corners. I kept my hands buried deep in my pockets and watched his approach. My mind was already categorizing every single detail: the rental plates on his vehicle, the complete lack of corporate insignia, the heavy aluminum briefcase clutched tightly in his gloved hand. He stopped a few feet away, invading my personal space, just enough to establish dominance, while keeping a polite, practiced smile plastered on his face. "Maya Washington," he said, his voice smooth and carrying effortlessly over the wind. "I am so glad I caught you before you headed back into town. My name is Vance. I represent Apex Energy Solutions. We have been monitoring this parcel of land for quite some time." He did not ask how I was doing. He did not ask about the shattered windows of the collapsed cabin behind me. He treated the entire interaction like a foregone conclusion. Vance stepped forward and placed his heavy briefcase flat on the icy hood of my rental truck. The metal latches snapped open with a loud clack. He lifted the lid, revealing neat banded stacks of $100 bills. Next to the cash lay a single sheet of paper and a sleek silver pen. $20,000, Vance said, gesturing expansively to the money. In cash. Available to you right this exact second. All you have to do is sign this quitclaim deed transferring the property rights to Apex Energy. You take the money, you drive back to the airport, and you never have to think about this frozen wasteland ever again. I stared at the cash. I did not reach for it. Why would an energy conglomerate pay $20,000 in raw cash for a collapsed shack on a useless plot of land? I asked, my voice perfectly steady. Vance sighed, projecting a calculated mixture of sympathy and corporate exhaustion. He launched into a meticulously rehearsed lie. He claimed that historical geological surveys indicated a severe toxic runoff issue beneath the topsoil. Old mining waste, he said, gesturing vaguely toward the dense tree line. Lead, arsenic, and heavy metal contamination. The environmental cleanup costs alone would completely bankrupt a private citizen. He insisted that his company was quietly buying up all the contaminated parcels in the region for a massive corporate remediation project. He looked me right in the eyes and told me he was doing me a massive favor by taking this toxic financial liability off my hands. It was a brilliant pitch. A desperate, abandoned woman who had just lost her fiancé and her family would grab that cash and run. She would sign the paper without reading the fine print. She would be grateful for the rescue. But I was not a desperate woman. I was a senior environmental data analyst. I spent 60 hours a week interpreting soil degradation metrics, chemical runoff patterns, and complex geological surveys. I did not look at the money. I looked down at his expensive Italian leather boots. The black leather was scuffed from the short walk across my property, but it was the distinct residue clinging to the welt of his soles that caught my absolute attention. It was a very specific, chalky yellowish-white dust. It did not look like snow. It did not look like common dirt. It looked exactly like oxidized rare earth elements. Specifically, it bore the visual signature of raw, unrefined neodymium mixed with dysprosium. You do not find that specific chalky oxidation sitting on the surface of old lead mines. You only find it when someone has been conducting fresh, deep-core drilling into a massive, highly concentrated vein of rare earth minerals. Minerals that are currently the most sought-after materials on the entire planet, absolutely vital for manufacturing electric vehicle batteries, military guidance systems, and advanced tech infrastructure. My brain instantly connected the scattered data points. The cryptic text message from the local surveyor telling me not to sell. The sudden appearance of a corporate shark carrying untraceable cash. The elaborate lie about toxic soil. The glowing dust on his boots. This land was not a toxic liability. It was an absolute goldmine. It was a staggering fortune hiding right beneath the frozen earth. I looked back up at Vance. His polite smile was beginning to strain at the edges. He picked up the silver pen and held it out toward me. "It is freezing out here, Maya," he said, dropping the professional tone for a false sense of familiarity. "Let us make this easy. Sign the paper. Take the money. Go warm up." I did not take the pen. Instead, I took a slow, deliberate step forward, forcing him to hold his ground. "You need to fire your geological cover story writers, Vance," I said, my voice dropping into a cold, hard register that commanded the freezing air. If this land were heavily contaminated with arsenic and lead from legacy mining, the surrounding flora would exhibit massive chlorosis. The pine needles at the base of the tree line would be yellowing and brittle. The snowmelt would show distinctly reddish-brown iron oxide staining. But the runoff here is crystal clear, and the vegetation is thriving despite the deep frost. Vance lowered the pen. His smile completely vanished. The corporate charm evaporated instantly, leaving only a cold, calculating stare. I pointed directly at his boots. "Furthermore," I continued, "the residue on your footwear is highly reactive. That chalky, pale yellow oxidation is strictly characteristic of lanthanide series elements exposed to surface moisture. You have been walking around a fresh core drilling site. You are not here to remediate toxic waste. You are here to steal the extraction rights to a massive rare earth mineral deposit before I figure out what I actually own." The silence between us was deafening. The wind howled, kicking up a sharp spray of ice against the side of the truck, but neither of us blinked. Vance slowly closed the lid of the briefcase. The sharp snap of the latches sounded like a gunshot. He realized his tactic had completely failed. He was not dealing with a naive, heartbroken daughter. He was dealing with a specialist who had just caught him in a multi-million-dollar lie. "You are a long way from home, little lady," Vance said softly. The friendly facade was entirely gone. His voice carried a quiet, dangerous threat. "Accidents happen out here in the cold all the time. It would be a real shame if your rental truck suddenly would not start." I let out a sharp, genuine laugh. I was not intimidated by a man in a tailored suit making vague threats in the woods. I pulled my phone out of my coat pocket and held it up. The screen still showed absolutely no service, but he did not know that. "I already recorded your license plate, your vehicle identification number, and your face." I lied effortlessly. "The data has already been uploaded to a secure cloud server accessed by my legal counsel in Atlanta. If I do not check in within the hour, they will forward your exact location to the Alaskan State Troopers and file corporate espionage charges against Apex Energy Solutions. I suggest you take your $20,000 and get off my property before I have you arrested for criminal trespassing." Vance stared at me, visibly weighing his options. He realized I was entirely serious. He grabbed the heavy briefcase off the hood of my truck and walked quickly back toward his armored SUV. His boots crunched heavily against the snow. He pulled open the driver's side door, but paused before getting inside. He looked over the roof of the vehicle, his eyes locking onto mine with absolute malice. He did not apologize. He did not try to negotiate further. Instead, he delivered a single sentence that hit me harder than the freezing wind. "Your brother said you would be difficult." He slid into the driver's seat, slammed the heavy door shut, and threw the SUV into reverse. The massive tires spun, throwing a violent wave of ice and mud into the air as he aggressively backed out of the narrow driveway, disappearing rapidly down the treacherous dirt road. I stood completely frozen in the clearing, the roar of his engine fading into the distance. My brother, Jamal. The realization struck me with the force of a physical blow. Jamal did not just get the Miami mansion, he knew about the Alaskan minerals. My family had actively colluded with this energy conglomerate. They gave me the cabin under the guise of an inheritance, fully expecting me to blindly sign the land over to the corporate scout for a meager $20,000. They intended to pocket the real multi-million-dollar payout for themselves through a backdoor corporate deal. They had thrown me to the wolves, assuming I was too stupid and too broken to realize I was holding a winning lottery ticket. My chest heaved as I breathed in the sharp, icy air. They thought they had outsmarted me. They thought they had completely discarded me. But they had just handed me the exact weapon I was going to use to destroy them. I watched the heavy tires of the armored SUV chew through the snow, the red taillights flashing once before the vehicle vanished completely into the dense frozen tree line. The absolute silence of the Alaskan wilderness rushed back in to fill the void, but my mind was deafeningly loud. The emotional toll of losing my entire family and the man I was supposed to marry in a single evening was heavy, a suffocating weight pressing down on my chest. But I did not have the luxury of falling apart in the snow. I refused to shed a single tear for people who viewed my existence as a convenient joke. Instead, I channeled every ounce of that pain, every shred of betrayal into cold, hard logic. I turned on my heel, marched back to my rental truck, and threw open the heavy metal tailgate. I never traveled to remote environmental sites without my specialized gear. It was a professional habit that my parents had always mocked at dinner parties, calling me paranoid and obsessed with my work. Right now, that obsession was my greatest weapon. I pulled out my reinforced field case containing my emergency soil testing kits, a portable mass spectrometer, chemical reagent vials, and a deep soil core sampler. The temperature was dropping dangerously fast, the wind howling violently through the shattered, jagged windows of the ruined cabin. The cold was meant to break me, but I barely felt it. I walked over to the exact spot where Vance had stood with his condescending smile and his briefcase full of cash. I tracked the heavy indentations of his Italian leather boots in the frost, set up my equipment directly over his footprints, and drove the steel core sampler deep into the frozen, unforgiving earth. For the next 24 hours, I survived in a state of hyper-focused isolation. When the biting wind became too severe, risking frostbite on my exposed fingers, I retreated to the cab of my rental truck. I ran the heater in short, calculated bursts to conserve my limited gasoline, turning the passenger seat into a makeshift geological laboratory. I worked through the freezing night, my breath pluming in the dark cabin as I ran chemical analyses on the soil samples. I watched the reagent liquids change color in the dim light of the dashboard. I pulled up cached offline geospatial mapping software on my laptop, running complex environmental algorithms, and cross-referencing topographical anomalies with raw magnetic field data. By dawn, the data had compiled into a crystal-clear, undeniable picture. The results glowing on my laptop screen were so staggering that I had to run the chemical models 3 separate times just to ensure I had not made a calculation error. I had not. The dilapidated, rotting cabin my parents had thrown at me like a piece of garbage was sitting directly on top of a massive geological anomaly. It was an exceptionally dense, high-purity vein of neodymium and dysprosium. In the modern global tech economy, these specific rare earth minerals are infinitely more valuable than gold. They are the absolute critical components required to manufacture high-capacity electric vehicle batteries, advanced military guidance systems, and next-generation renewable energy infrastructure. Vance had offered me $20,000 in cash. He had looked me in the eye and treated me like a desperate, uninformed idiot, hoping I would eagerly sign away a fortune just to escape the cold. I plugged the raw extraction metrics, the purity levels, and the acreage dimensions into a standard industry valuation model. The numbers spun rapidly on the screen before locking into place. The mineral rights to this specific plot of land were not worth $20,000. The untapped vein beneath my freezing, mud-caked boots was valued at an astronomical $67 million. My parents had handed me a $67 million empire because they were too blinded by their own arrogance to commission a basic land survey before transferring the deed. But Vance's parting words echoed loudly in my mind. Your brother said you would be difficult. Jamal knew. Jamal had absolutely orchestrated this. He had likely run his failing tech logistics company right into the ground, drowning in secret debt, and had desperately sought a corporate bailout. He struck a backdoor deal with Apex Energy Solutions to secure a massive finder fee, but they needed my signature because the property was legally in my name. They had ambushed me at dinner, broken my engagement, and humiliated me, fully expecting me to blindly sign the land over to the first corporate scout who offered me a few $1,000s. They intended to pocket the real payout for themselves while leaving me with absolutely nothing. They had completely underestimated my intelligence, my profession, and my absolute refusal to be a victim. I packed my equipment back into the hard case with meticulous, deliberate care. I secured the soil samples, shut my laptop, and threw my bag into the back of the truck. I shifted the heavy vehicle into 4-wheel drive and began the brutal, bone-rattling journey back toward Anchorage. I needed to reach civilization. I needed a secure internet connection to lock down the deed, permanently register the mineral rights under a newly formed blind trust, and initiate a massive legal firewall before Jamal and Apex Energy could attempt another hostile maneuver. The treacherous dirt road slowly gave way to cracked asphalt, and the dense, oppressive tree line finally began to thin. The frozen landscape opened up as I neared the city limits. I kept my eyes focused on the dashboard screen, waiting for the exact second I crossed back into the cellular network grid. A single bar of service appeared, then 2, then 3. My phone detonated. It did not just ring. It vibrated violently and continuously against the center console, lighting up the dark interior of the truck with an endless stream of frantic notifications. The rapid chimes of missed calls and urgent text messages filled the quiet cabin. I reached over and picked up the device, keeping one hand steady on the steering wheel. My screen was completely flooded. There were exactly 14 missed calls in a row from Brenda and Calvin. They had never called me 14 times in my entire life, not even when I was hospitalized with pneumonia in college. My parents' names were stacked on the screen like a flashing neon warning sign. They were panicking. Before I could even swipe to open my voicemail app, a new text message flashed aggressively across the top banner. It was from Chloe, my sister-in-law. There was no polite greeting. There was no trace of the smug, condescending tone she had used when she slid the restaurant bill across the table to me. It was a direct, panicked demand. Jamal is in serious trouble. We need you to take out a loan on the Alaska property immediately. Sign the authorization form I just emailed you. I stared at the glowing screen of my phone, the notification from Chloe hanging there like a digital manifestation of their absolute audacity. Jamal is in trouble. We need you to take out a loan on the Alaska property immediately. Sign the authorization form I just emailed. I did not reply. I did not laugh. I simply swiped the message away, turning my phone face down in the cup holder. I shifted my heavy rental truck into gear and accelerated down the highway toward downtown Anchorage. My family had spent my entire life treating me like a disposable asset, a quiet background character they could push around to make Jamal look like a star. Now the golden boy had crashed his stolen spotlight into the ground, and they expected me to sell the scrap metal of my inheritance to bail him out. They were operating under the delusion that I was still the obedient, silent daughter who would bow to their pressure. They had no idea that I had just spent a freezing night mapping a $67 million arsenal beneath that dirt. And they had absolutely no idea how efficiently I was about to weaponize it against them. I drove straight to the sleek, glass-paneled high-rise that housed the most ruthless corporate law firm in Alaska. I did not need a family attorney. I needed a predator, a local expert who understood mineral rights extraction law and corporate defense better than anyone else in the state. I walked past the mahogany reception desk and demanded 10 minutes with their senior partner, Vivian. Vivian was a woman in her late 50s with sharp, calculating eyes and a tailored suit that projected pure, unadulterated power. She looked up from her desk as I walked in, assessing me with a cold, professional gaze. I did not waste time with pleasantries. I unzipped my heavy duffel bag, pulled out a thick stack of $100 bills I had withdrawn for emergency travel funds, and placed the cash directly on her polished glass desk. "I need an ironclad limited liability company established in the next hour," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. "And I need a corporate firewall built around a massive rare earth mineral deposit before my family in Atlanta even smells a dime of it." Vivian raised an eyebrow, intrigued by the cash and the complete lack of panic in my demeanor. She gestured for me to sit. "Talk to me." For the next 45 minutes, I laid out the exact geospatial data, the chemical analysis of the neodymium and dysprosium vein, and the aggressive encounter with the scout from Apex Energy Solutions. I explained that my family had colluded with the energy conglomerate, attempting to trick me into selling the land for $20,000 while they secretly planned to pocket the massive extraction payout. Vivian did not blink. Her fingers flew across her keyboard as she immediately began drafting the legal barricades. "We will lock the mineral rights and the property deed into a blind trust controlled entirely by your new LLC," she explained, her voice sharp and precise. "Once the transfer is complete, your family cannot touch the land. Apex Energy cannot force a hostile purchase, and your assets will be completely insulated from any external financial liabilities." "Do it," I instructed. "And run a deep background check on my brother, Jamal Washington. He is currently operating a logistics tech startup in Miami, and his wife just panicked via text about a loan. I need to know exactly how much trouble he is in." Vivian nodded, taking my heavy metal corporate card to process the rest of her exorbitant retainer. "Consider it done. The property is officially locked down, Maya. They cannot touch you." I walked out of the law firm, feeling an intense, burning sense of invincibility. The freezing Alaskan wind whipped against my face, but I felt completely untouchable. I slid back into the driver's seat of my truck, picked up my phone, and finally tapped on my mother's contact name. I was not calling to obey her. I was calling to gather intelligence. She answered on the very first ring. "Maya, thank God," Brenda gasped into the receiver. Her voice was frantic, vibrating with a high-pitched manufactured panic designed to trigger my guilt. "We have been trying to reach you all night. Why is your phone off? Have you checked your email? You need to open the document Chloe sent you right now." I leaned back against the leather seat, staring out at the snow-capped mountains. "Good morning to you too, Mom. I am perfectly fine, thank you for asking. What exactly is this urgent authorization form you want me to sign?" Brenda let out a harsh, dramatic sigh, plunging right into her manipulative script. "Maya, your brother made a tiny accounting error down in Miami. It is nothing really, just a slight miscalculation with his startup funding. But the IRS is being completely unreasonable, and he has some temporary tax liens on his accounts. The Miami estate is tied up in the audit." A tiny accounting error. I ran the logistical probability in my head. The IRS does not seize bank accounts and put tax liens on a $3.6 million waterfront estate over a tiny error. Jamal had not just miscalculated. He had committed massive systematic fraud. He had likely funneled investor money into his personal accounts to maintain his lavish lifestyle, and the federal government had finally caught him. He was completely broke, and my parents were desperate to protect their perfect golden child from federal prison. As his sister, it is your duty to help him. Brenda continued, her tone shifting from frantic to commanding. "We need you to leverage that cabin we gave you. Use the land as collateral to take out a rapid commercial loan. We only need a few $100,000 to clear the immediate liens and get the government off his back. Family protects family, Maya. You owe us this." The sheer breathtaking entitlement of her statement hung in the cold air of my truck. They had publicly humiliated me at a steakhouse. They had smiled while my fiancé walked out on me. They had handed me what they believed was a worthless frozen pile of garbage, and now they were demanding I mortgage that same garbage to save the son they had always loved more. "Absolutely not," I said. My voice was stripped of any emotion, cold and hollow. "I am not setting my financial stability on fire to keep your golden child warm. Jamal dug this hole, Jamal can sit in it." "Maya Washington, you listen to me right now." Brenda shrieked, the mask of the refined Southern matriarch completely shattering. "You will do exactly as you are told. You are nothing without this family. You are a solitary, bitter woman who just lost the only man who was ever willing to tolerate you. You will sign that paper, or I swear to God." There was a sudden scuffling sound on the other end of the line. Brenda, angry breathing, was abruptly cut off as the phone was snatched from her hand. A heavier, darker voice came through the speaker. It was my father. Calvin did not yell. He did not sound frantic like my mother. His voice dropped into a cold, terrifyingly calm register that he reserved for destroying corporate rivals in the boardroom. He thought he was dealing with the quiet, submissive daughter he had bullied for 35 years. "You do not have a choice," Maya, Calvin said smoothly. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white, but I remained perfectly silent, letting him dig his own grave. "Did you really think I would hand over a piece of property without keeping a leash on it?" Calvin sneered, his voice dripping with absolute condescension. "You should have read the fine print on the transfer documents at the restaurant before you stormed out like a spoiled child. I never fully transferred the deed into your name. I structured it as a conditional conveyance. We still hold the power of attorney over that specific asset." My heart hammered against my ribs, but my mind raced back to the legal documents Vivian had just reviewed. "You will sign the authorization to leverage that property immediately." Calvin threatened, the absolute certainty of victory ringing in his words. "You will sign it, or we will legally revoke the asset, execute the power of attorney, and take the land back today." I did not scream. I did not beg. I did not attempt to reason with a man who viewed my life as a sacrificial pawn for his son's ego. I simply pulled the phone away from my ear, pressed the red icon on the screen, and cut Calvin Washington off mid-sentence. I put the rental truck in park, grabbed my heavy field bag, and marched straight back through the revolving glass doors of Vivian's law firm. The receptionist did not even try to stop me. I bypassed the waiting area and pushed open the heavy oak door to Vivian's corner office. She looked up from a stack of contracts, her sharp eyes registering my return. My father just threatened to execute a dormant power of attorney and revoke the deed, I said, dropping my bag onto the floor. He claims the transfer was conditional. Vivian let out a sharp, genuine bark of laughter. She leaned back in her leather chair and shook her head. Your father is playing a losing hand with extreme arrogance. A general power of attorney does not override a direct executed transfer of an asset into a corporate entity, especially when you are the principal and you are actively managing your own affairs. The moment I filed the LLC documents an hour ago, that land ceased to belong to Maya Washington, the individual. It belongs to Apex Apexis Holdings, a blind trust of which you are the sole director. His power of attorney is entirely useless. He cannot touch the land. He cannot touch the minerals. He cannot touch you. A heavy, profound wave of relief washed over me, but Vivian was not finished. She picked up a thick, red-tabbed manila folder from her desk and slid it across the polished glass toward me. I expedited that background check on your brother Vivian, said, her tone dropping into a grim, professional register. Your mother was lying. Jamal did not make a tiny accounting error. Your brother is standing on the edge of a federal indictment. I opened the folder. The top page was a summary of liens, bank notices, and flagged federal audits. My eyes scanned the staggering numbers, my analytical brain instantly processing the catastrophic damage. Jamal leveraged the $3.6 million Miami estate to the absolute hilt, Vivian explained, tapping a manicured finger against the financial summary. He took out massive, high-interest commercial loans, using the property as collateral, and poured every single cent into a highly volatile, completely unregulated cryptocurrency exchange. The exchange collapsed 3 weeks ago. The money is entirely gone. The Miami mansion is severely underwater and actively facing foreclosure. I stared at the paperwork, the sheer magnitude of his stupidity rendering me momentarily speechless. He bet the family estate on a crypto scam. It gets worse, Vivian continued, her voice devoid of pity. He did not just lose the house. He commingled investor funds from his logistics startup with his personal crypto accounts. That is textbook wire fraud. The IRS Criminal Investigation Division is already building a case. The federal government is breathing directly down his neck. If he does not produce a massive influx of capital immediately to pay back the defrauded investors and satisfy the IRS tax liens, your brother is going to federal prison. The entire picture snapped into brutal, absolute clarity. The sudden urgency, the ambush at the restaurant, the demand for my Alaskan cabin. They did not just want to steal my inheritance to make themselves richer. They were trying to steal my inheritance to keep the golden child out of a federal penitentiary. They were willing to strip me of my only asset, ruin my credit, and leave me destitute just to cover up Jamal's catastrophic criminal failures. Let the IRS have him, I said, closing the folder with a sharp snap. Lock down the perimeter, Vivian. We are moving forward with the extraction rights. The next 72 hours were a masterclass in high-stakes corporate warfare. Vivian leveraged her extensive network and bypassed the mid-level scouts entirely. We did not speak to Apex Energy Solutions. Instead, Vivian brought the executive acquisition team from a global Tier 1 electric vehicle manufacturer directly to our boardroom in Anchorage. They sat across from me in tailored suits, reviewing the soil degradation metrics, the chemical runoff patterns, and the deep core samples I had extracted from the frozen earth. They brought their own geologist to verify my data, and the confirmation was unanimous. The neodymium and dysprosium deposits were of staggering purity. I did not act like a desperate daughter. I acted like a senior environmental data analyst who knew exactly what she was holding. We finalized a preliminary extraction rights agreement that sent shockwaves through the room. I retained absolute ownership of the land. The manufacturer secured exclusive extraction rights for an 8-figure upfront cash payment accompanied by a heavy long-term royalty structure on every single ounce of rare earth mineral pulled from the ground. I walked into that boardroom, an abandoned, betrayed woman. I walked out a multi-millionaire. The ink on the preliminary contracts was barely dry when the dam broke. I was sitting in the airport lounge waiting for my flight back to Atlanta when Vivian called me. Her voice carried a rare note of genuine thrill. "Check your email, Maya." Someone at the manufacturer leaked the preliminary deal to the press. I opened my inbox and clicked the link Vivian had forwarded. It was the digital front page of the Wall Street Journal. Alaskan rare earth strike disrupts tech sector independent analyst, secures mineral rights valued upwards of $67 million. I scrolled through the article. The financial journalists had dug deep. They outlined the failure of Apex Energy to secure the parcel and highlighted the massive countermove by the EV manufacturer. And right there in the third paragraph was my name. Maya Washington, former senior data analyst, identified as the sole owner and strategic mastermind behind the newly formed LLC holding the rights. My secret was completely exposed to the world. The valuation was public. My name was public. By now, the Google alerts on Calvin's phone were certainly screaming. My parents knew exactly what they had thrown away. Jamal knew exactly what he had lost. The golden ticket that could have saved him from federal prison had just been cashed by the sister they had discarded. I closed my laptop, boarded my flight, and flew back to the humid, suffocating heat of Atlanta. I only returned to the South to tie up the loose ends of my former life. I needed to break the lease on my Midtown apartment pack, my personal belongings, and formally resign from the environmental firm that had drastically underpaid me for years. I had no intention of staying in Georgia. The world was entirely open to me now. I parked my car outside my corporate office building. The familiar scent of roasted coffee beans drifted from the cafe across the street. I grabbed an iced latte, adjusted my sunglasses, and pushed through the heavy glass revolving doors into the expansive marble-floored lobby of my building. I was mentally preparing my resignation speech, calculating how quickly I could clear my desk and walk out. I took 2 steps toward the security turnstiles and stopped dead in my tracks. Standing in the center of the lobby, blocking my path to the elevators, was Trey. He was wearing his best navy suit, the one he saved for important client presentations. His hair was perfectly styled, but his posture betrayed a frantic, nervous energy. In his hands, he clutched a massive, absurdly expensive bouquet of deep red roses. He was sweating slightly under the bright lobby lights, shifting his weight from foot to foot as he scanned the morning crowd. When his eyes finally locked onto mine, his face contorted into a mask of pathetic, manufactured repentance. This was the man who had sat silently at my parents' dinner table while they ripped my inheritance away. This was the man who had looked at me with absolute pity, told me I was a financial liability, and walked out the door without a second glance. He had clearly read the Wall Street Journal. Trey took a deep, shaky breath, forced a desperate, charming smile onto his face, and walked directly toward me. "Maya, baby, I have been looking everywhere for you." "Been looking." Trey stopped 2 feet away from me, thrusting the massive bouquet of red roses forward like a shield. Up close, the desperation rolling off him was almost palpable. The sharp, confident aura he had worn at the steakhouse was entirely gone, replaced by the frantic energy of a man watching a winning lottery ticket flutter away in the wind. He tried to reach out and touch my arm, aiming for a gesture of intimate familiarity. I took a slow, deliberate step back. My expression remained completely flat. I took a sip of my iced latte, letting the silence stretch until it became suffocating. "I know you are angry," Trey continued, dropping his hand awkwardly to his side. "And you have every right to be. I was a coward. I walked away when things got hard, and I have hated myself for it every single second of every single day since that dinner." I lowered my coffee cup. "You walked out on me in front of my entire family, left me with a check, and blocked my number," I stated, keeping my voice perfectly level. There was no anger in my tone. Anger required an emotional investment that Trey no longer warranted. "It was not about you, Maya. I swear to God it was not about you," he pleaded, his voice rising in pitch. He glanced around the bustling corporate lobby, aware that a few heads were beginning to turn. I had a temporary mental breakdown. The stress from my tech startup was completely destroying me. The venture capital fell through. My investors were pulling out, and I was drowning. When your father started laying into you about your inheritance, I just panicked. I had a total mental collapse. I was so intimidated by your family wealth and their power. I felt like I could not provide for you. I felt completely inadequate. It was a masterclass in gaslighting. He was attempting to reframe his cowardly, calculated betrayal as a noble, tragic consequence of his own high standards. He wanted me to believe he left me because he loved me too much to drag me down. It was almost poetic in its absurdity. I went to therapy. Trey lied effortlessly, placing his free hand over his heart. I realized that my pride was ruining the best thing that ever happened to me. I was coming to find you anyway. I was going to beg for your forgiveness even before I saw the morning news. I raised an eyebrow. The morning news. Yes, he said, a greedy, hungry light suddenly flashing in his eyes. The Wall Street Journal article. Maya, I am so incredibly proud of you. I always knew you were brilliant. I always told you that you were destined for greatness. $67 million. Do you realize what this means for us? With my business vision and your new capital, we are unstoppable. We can merge our assets. We can build an empire together. Just give me one more chance to be the man you deserve. He held the roses out again, wearing a smile that he clearly thought was irresistible. I looked at the roses. I looked at his expensive tailored suit. I looked at the greedy, calculating light shining in his eyes. He actually believed I was foolish enough to fall for this. He genuinely thought that a few cheap compliments and a grocery store bouquet would erase the absolute humiliation he had subjected me to. Trey, I said softly, my voice carrying clearly over the ambient hum of the lobby. I am a senior data analyst. My entire profession is based on collecting, storing, and weaponizing information. Did you honestly think I do not keep receipts? His confident smile faltered. What are you talking about? I pulled my smartphone out of my pocket. I swiped down on the screen and accessed the Bluetooth settings. I had worked in this building for 4 years. I knew the security guards. I knew the maintenance staff. I also knew that the massive high-fidelity surround sound system in the main lobby was controlled by an unsecured Bluetooth receiver at the central reception desk. I tapped the screen, pairing my device directly to the building audio network. The soft instrumental jazz playing overhead abruptly cut out. A sharp electronic chime echoed through the expansive marble lobby, signaling a new device connection. Every single person in the vicinity stopped moving. The baristas at the corner coffee stand paused. The executives waiting for the elevators turned around. The security guards looked up from their monitors. You claimed you had a temporary mental breakdown due to startup stress, I said, maintaining absolute eye contact with him. You claimed you were intimidated by my family. Let us review the raw data. I opened my audio recording app. The night of the steakhouse disaster, the moment my family had begun their coordinated attack, I had quietly pressed record on my phone under the table. It was a reflex. I always documented hostile environments. I hit play. The audio blasted through the high-definition lobby speakers, echoing off the marble walls with crystal-clear precision. Trey's own voice filled the room, stripped of all the fake charm and practiced humility. I am out. Do not call me. Do not text me. The recorded voice of Trey sneered from the speakers, dripping with absolute disgust. I thought I was marrying into a dynasty. I thought you were actually worth something. Your parents just handed your brother a multi-million-dollar estate and gave you a rotting wooden shack in the snow. I need a partner who brings capital to the table. I cannot build an empire with a pathetic loser. The recording stopped. The heavy, suffocating silence that followed was absolute. Trey's face drained of all color. He looked like he was going to vomit. The red roses trembled violently in his hands. Every executive, every receptionist, and every security guard in the lobby was staring directly at him with undisguised contempt. He had just been exposed as a gold-digging opportunist in front of my entire corporate hierarchy. You cannot build an empire with a pathetic loser, I repeated, echoing his exact words back to him. The tone of my voice was razor-sharp, slicing through the quiet lobby. And I cannot build an empire with a man who begs for scraps the second he realizes he walked away from a gold mine. Maya, please, Trey stammered, taking a desperate step forward. You took that out of context. I was angry. I did not mean it. I did not let him finish. I turned my head toward the main reception desk and made eye contact with Marcus, the head of building security. Marcus had known me for years. He had heard the entire recording. He did not need verbal instructions. Marcus, I called out, my voice commanding and absolute. Please remove this trespasser from the building. He is making me feel unsafe. Marcus was already moving. He and another heavily built security guard flanked Trey in seconds. Sir, it is time for you to leave, Marcus said, his hand clamping down hard on Trey's shoulder. Wait, let go of me, Trey protested, his voice cracking as he tried to shake off the guard. Maya, we can fix this. We are a team. You need me to help you manage this kind of money. You do not know what you are doing. The guards did not hesitate. They grabbed him by the arms and forcefully marched him backward toward the exit. Trey struggled, his polished shoes slipping on the marble floor. In the commotion, the massive bouquet of red roses dropped from his hands, scattering crimson petals across the ground. Marcus dragged him backward, pushing him roughly through the revolving glass doors and out onto the hot Atlanta sidewalk. I watched him stumble outside, thoroughly humiliated and permanently exiled from my life. I stepped forward, my heel coming down directly on one of the dropped red roses, crushing it flat against the marble. I took another calm sip of my iced latte. The trash had finally taken itself out. I turned toward the elevator banks, ready to head upstairs, hand in my resignation, and close this chapter of my life forever. But just as the elevator doors chimed open, a violent commotion erupted at the front entrance. The heavy glass doors of the lobby did not just open, they were shoved violently apart. I stopped and turned back around. Storming through the entrance, completely bypassing the security desk and the receptionist, was the unholy trinity, Brenda, Calvin, and Jamal. They did not look like the polished, untouchable dynasty that had humiliated me at the steakhouse. They looked absolutely unhinged. Jamal was wearing a wrinkled designer shirt, his eyes bloodshot, his hair disheveled, radiating the frantic terror of a man who knew the federal government was closing in. Calvin's face was purple with suppressed rage, his jaw clenched so tight it looked like it might shatter. Brenda was breathing heavily, clutching a designer handbag like it was a weapon. They had seen the Wall Street Journal article. They knew they had been outplayed. They knew I held the $67 million key that could save Jamal from a federal penitentiary. They marched across the marble floor, directly toward me. They did not look apologetic. They did not look like they wanted to negotiate. They looked desperate, furious, and ready for an absolute war. The heavy, polished glass doors of my corporate building had barely finished revolving before the unholy trinity breached the lobby. They marched across the pristine marble floor, completely ignoring the security desk and the bewildered receptionist calling after them. My parents and my brother moved with a chaotic, desperate energy that was entirely foreign to their usual curated elegance. Jamal looked like an absolute wreck. His custom-tailored Italian suits and carefully maintained social media aesthetic had vanished. He was wearing a rumpled, sweat-stained dress shirt, his eyes bloodshot and darting around the lobby with the frantic, terrified paranoia of a man waiting for federal agents to drop from the ceiling. My mother, Brenda, clutched her designer handbag with white-knuckled intensity, her face pinched in a mask of desperate fury. My father, Calvin, marched beside them, projecting a false sense of authority that I could now see right through. I stood perfectly still, my iced latte in hand, watching them approach. I did not shrink back. I did not lower my gaze. I held my hand up, a sharp, commanding gesture that stopped them dead in their tracks, right in the middle of the crowded reception area. "We are not doing this here," I commanded. My voice was stripped of any daughterly deference, carrying an absolute icy authority that halted my mother mid-breath. "We are going up to my office. You will remain perfectly silent until the door is closed." For the first time in my entire life, they actually obeyed me. The attack. The elevator ride to the 14th floor was suffocatingly quiet. The moment we stepped into my private corner office, I walked around my heavy mahogany desk and remained standing. I deliberately did not offer them a seat. Brenda could not hold it in a single second longer. She slammed her handbag onto the leather guest chair and pointed a trembling manicured finger directly at my face. "You are going to sign over 80% of that electric vehicle contract right now." "Maya," Brenda demanded, her voice shrill and vibrating against the glass walls of my office. I stared at her, There was no greeting. There was no apology for ambushing me at the steakhouse. There was not a single word of remorse for setting me up with a predatory corporate scout, or for watching my fiancé walk out on me without lifting a finger. There was just an immediate, unapologetic, demanding entitlement to the massive fortune I had secured through my own intellect. Jamal finally spoke, his voice cracking under the crushing weight of his reality. Maya, please, you have to help me. The feds are auditing every single account I have. They are going to seize the Miami house by Friday. My business accounts are completely frozen. I need $50 million immediately to pay back the venture capitalists and clear the IRS tax liens before the Department of Justice files formal wire fraud charges. I am going to lose everything. I looked at the golden boy. He was sweating profusely, shifting his weight from foot to foot, looking absolutely pathetic. Brenda stepped directly in front of him, physically shielding her precious son from my cold gaze. You owe this to the family name, she screamed, her voice taking on a frantic, manipulative edge. We cannot have a black man of his stature go to prison. Do you have any idea what the justice system does to successful black men in this country? You are going to let them destroy your brother over a simple misunderstanding. You are going to let the media tear down a prominent black-owned business. It was the most vile, manipulative tactic she had ever used in her life. She was actively weaponizing our race and societal pressure to shield a criminal. She was trying to frame his catastrophic calculated greed as a systemic injustice, hoping to trigger some deep-seated sense of cultural loyalty to guilt me into handing over my fortune. The pushback. I did not flinch. I placed my iced coffee on a coaster set, both hands flat on the polished mahogany of my desk, and leaned forward. Do not you dare use systemic racism to cover up his absolute incompetence, I said, my voice dropping into a deadly quiet register that forced them to listen to every single syllable. The federal justice system is not targeting Jamal because he is a successful black man. The federal government is targeting Jamal because he is a fraud. Jamal flinched as if I had physically struck him, but I did not stop. He is not a victim of the system. I continued, my words sharp and surgical. He stole millions of dollars from his investors and gambled it on a fraudulent cryptocurrency scheme because he wanted to play a billionaire on the internet. He leveraged a $3.6 million estate. He could not afford to sustain a lifestyle that was entirely fake. He committed massive, undeniable wire fraud, and now the bill has come due. I shifted my gaze from my trembling brother directly to my parents. And you too funded this massive delusion. Your toxic, blinding favoritism made you completely ignore the fact that your son possesses absolutely zero business acumen. You threw me to the wolves. You handed me a piece of frozen dirt you thought was worthless and banked your entire legacy on a man who just wire frauded his way straight into a federal indictment. You bankrupted your own morals to prop him up, and now his actions have bankrupted your reality. Brenda gasped loudly, bringing a hand to her chest in genuine horrified shock. You cannot speak to us this way. We are your family. We raised you. You stopped being my family the night you tried to sell me out to a corporate scout for $20,000, I stated with absolute unwavering finality. I am not bailing him out. I am not saving the Miami mansion. I am not paying off his federal tax liens. I will not give you a single penny of my money. The hook. The room went completely dead silent. The ambient hum of the city traffic outside the 14th floor windows seemed to fade away. Jamal dropped his face into his hands, letting out a pathetic, muffled sob of pure defeat. Brenda looked entirely destabilized, her mouth opening and closing as she searched for a manipulation tactic that would work. She found nothing. But Calvin stepped forward. The false panic and desperate father act completely evaporated from his face. It was replaced by a cold, calculating sneer that distorted his features into something entirely ruthless. He reached into his tailored suit jacket, his eyes locked onto mine with absolute malice. He pulled out a thick, heavily bound stack of legal documents printed on premium watermarked paper. He stepped right up to the edge of my desk and slammed the heavy paperwork down onto the mahogany surface. The sharp, violent crack of the paper hitting the wood echoed loudly through the office. We knew you would be a selfish, money-hungry disgrace, Calvin said, his voice dripping with absolute contempt. He leaned across the desk, invading my space, pointing a rigid finger at the top page of the legal binding. Did you really think I would let an amateur outplay me in a corporate acquisition? We filed an emergency injunction in the state of Alaska this morning. The court just froze your $67 million deal. You cannot sell what is not legally yours. I did not flinch when Calvin slammed the papers onto my desk. I simply looked down at the bold capitalized letters staring back at me. Emergency Temporary Injunction. It was a stall tactic, a legal temper tantrum designed to freeze the playing field while they scrambled for a real weapon. Vivian had warned me they might find a sympathetic judge to grant a temporary hold based on familial property disputes. I looked up at my father, his chest heaving with triumphant breaths, and told him to get his legal counsel ready because I was not backing down. 4 days later, the battlefield shifted from my corporate office to a sterile, high-stakes mediation room on the 40th floor of a downtown Atlanta legal firm. The air conditioning was cranked to a frigid temperature, but the atmosphere inside the room was boiling. I sat next to Vivian at the expansive glass conference table. Directly across from us sat the opposition. Calvin and Brenda anchored the center, projecting an air of absolute authority that was entirely fake. To their right sat Jamal and his wife Chloe. Chloe was draped in an authentic Chanel suit, clutching a crocodile leather handbag like a life preserver. She wore an expression of extreme practiced irritation, as if my refusal to hand over my fortune was a personal inconvenience to her social calendar. To my father's left sat Richard Sterling. He was a notorious corporate shark, a vicious litigator who specialized in bleeding opponents dry through endless, suffocating paperwork. My parents had likely maxed out their very last line of credit just to put him on retainer. At the head of the table sat Ms. Albright, a court-appointed mediator who looked completely immune to the heavy tension radiating across the glass. Sterling did not bother with pleasantries. He opened a thick leather binder, folded his hands, and delivered the ultimatum with the cold precision of an executioner. The terms are non-negotiable. Sterling stated, his dark eyes locking onto mine. We are demanding the immediate liquidation of the Alaskan mineral rights. The $67 million payout will be deposited into a joint family trust. 80% of those funds will be allocated to Jamal Washington to satisfy his outstanding commercial debts, clear his federal tax liens, and restructure his logistics company. The remaining 20% will be distributed at the discretion of Calvin and Brenda Washington. I stared at him, my face a mask of absolute calm. You are demanding I surrender my entire asset to pay off my brother's criminal wire fraud. It is a family asset, Brenda hissed, leaning forward. It belongs to the Washington name. You are acting like a greedy, selfish child. We are trying to save your brother's life and protect Chloe and the children from being thrown out on the street. Chloe let out a heavy, dramatic sigh, resting a manicured hand on Jamal's arm. Maya, you have to stop being so vindictive, she said, her voice dripping with entitled condescension. Jamal made a tiny business miscalculation. It happens to successful entrepreneurs all the time. We are under an immense amount of stress. The country club is already whispering about the audits. You have the money sitting right there. You owe it to us to fix this so we can move on with our lives. I looked directly at Chloe. Your husband did not make a miscalculation. He stole millions of dollars from his investors and gambled it on a fake cryptocurrency exchange. You are not under stress. You are under federal investigation. I will not give you a single penny to fund your counterfeit lifestyle. Sterling slammed his hand flat against the table, the sharp crack cutting off Chloe's indignant gasp. You will sign the transfer, Ms. Washington, or we will tie this property up in probate and civil litigation. For the next 2 decades, Sterling threatened, his voice dropping into a menacing growl. We filed the injunction. We froze your deal. We will challenge the original deed transfer. We will claim you manipulated your parents into signing over the property under false pretenses. We will bury you in so many motions appeals and discovery requests that you will spend every single dollar you have just trying to defend yourself. We will bankrupt you with legal fees before you ever see a dime from that electric vehicle contract. The threat hung heavily in the freezing air. It was the ultimate corporate bullying tactic. They knew they had absolutely no moral ground to stand on, so they were going to use the legal system as a weapon of financial attrition. They were banking on my fear of going broke. I kept my hands folded neatly in my lap. I am not intimidated by you, Mr. Sterling, and I am certainly not intimidated by my father. The deed is ironclad. The LLC is impenetrable. You are bluffing with an empty hand. Jamal let out a sharp, arrogant laugh. He leaned back in his leather chair, crossing his arms over his chest. The initial panic I had seen in my office 4 days ago had been entirely replaced by a smug, toxic confidence. Sterling had clearly convinced him that victory was inevitable. You always do this, Maya Jamal sneered, shaking his head. You always think you are the smartest person in the room, and you always end up losing. You should just sign the papers now and save yourself the humiliation. Dad and Mom are never going to let you win. They never have. I maintained my steady gaze. They are not going to save you this time, Jamal. They always save me. Jamal shot back, his voice rising with unearned arrogance. You really think you can beat me? Remember junior year of college? Remember when your tuition check miraculously bounced and you had to drop your spring classes to work double shifts at that pathetic diner? My breath caught perfectly still in my chest. Brenda shot Jamal a sharp warning look, but he was too intoxicated by his own ego to stop. He leaned across the table, a cruel, mocking smile spreading across his face. The market did not crash. Maya Jamal gloated, thoroughly enjoying the sound of his own voice. The college fund was not reallocated. I took the money. I needed $75,000 to fund the alpha stage of my logistics app and throw the biggest homecoming party the fraternity had ever seen. I forged your signature on the withdrawal slips. Mom and Dad found out 2 days later. And you know what they did. They covered for me. They told you the investments took a hit because they knew my startup was more important than your pointless environmental science degree. You have always been the sacrifice, Maya. You are just the stepping stone. Sign the papers. The absolute silence that followed his confession was deafening. Ms. Albright, the neutral mediator, dropped her pen. It clattered loudly against the glass table. She stared at Jamal, her professional composure completely shattered. She looked physically repulsed. She turned her gaze to Calvin and Brenda, who were not looking down in shame, but rather glaring at Jamal for revealing their secrets out loud. They did not regret the theft. They only regretted the admission. Mr. Sterling cleared his throat loudly, his face tightening with intense irritation. That is entirely irrelevant to the current property dispute, he stated, attempting to forcefully steer the conversation back to his legal threats. My clients are prepared to offer a minor concession. You retain 5% of the final sale and we drop the litigation. If you refuse, I will file 6 new motions by 5 o'clock today. I will freeze your bank accounts. I will drag your name through the mud in open court. You will lose everything. I did not look at Sterling. I looked at Vivian. My lawyer had not spoken a single word since we sat down. She had been quietly flipping through the massive 200-page stack of injunction filings and proposed settlement documents that Sterling had dumped in front of us. Her face was completely unreadable. She turned the final page, aligned the edges of the paper perfectly, and closed the binder. Ms. Albright, Vivian said, her voice smooth and chillingly polite. We would like to request a 5-minute recess to confer in private. Ms. Albright nodded quickly, clearly eager for a break from the toxic radiation pouring off my family. Granted. We will reconvene in 5 minutes. Vivian stood up, grabbed the heavy binder of legal documents, and gestured toward the door. I followed her out of the mediation room and down the long carpeted hallway. We turned the corner, stepping into a small soundproof alcove near the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. The moment the heavy wooden door clicked shut behind us, Vivian did something I had never seen her do. She threw her head back and started laughing. It was not a polite, professional chuckle. It was a rich, genuine, completely uncontained laugh that echoed off the glass walls. She leaned against the windowsill, shaking her head as she tapped her manicured fingernails against the leather binder in her hands. I stared at her, my pulse pounding with adrenaline from the confrontation. Vivian, what is it? Sterling just threatened to bankrupt me in probate court. Vivian wiped a tear of mirth from the corner of her eye and let out a long, deeply satisfied exhale. She opened the binder, flipped to a section buried deep in the middle of the stack, and pointed a sharp red fingernail at a single paragraph of dense legal text. "Richard Sterling is a corporate shark," Vivian said, a razor-sharp grin spreading across her face. "He is aggressive, he is mean, and he is very good at terrorizing people who do not know the law. But Richard Sterling is a corporate lawyer. He is not a trust and estates attorney. He is so used to bulldozing his opponents that he did not actually read the original property deed your father signed over to you. He just copy and pasted standard injunction templates and filed them blindly to scare you." I moved closer, looking at the block of text she was pointing to. What did he miss? Vivian looked up at me, her eyes shining with absolute predatory victory. "Maya," she said softly, "your father did not just sign over the Alaskan parcel. In his rush to dump what he thought was a worthless tax liability, Calvin used a blanket quitclaim deed template to sever all his personal liability. He did not specify the Alaskan coordinates. He transferred his entire holding portfolio to your name." I stopped breathing. Vivian tapped the paper again. "Sterling just filed an injunction stating that all assets held in your name are currently frozen and cannot be liquidated or leveraged by the original owner until the dispute is resolved. He thought he was freezing your mineral rights." She closed the binder with a resounding snap. "He just accidentally froze your parents' primary residence, their retirement accounts, and the deed to Jamal's Miami mansion. They cannot sell. They cannot borrow. They cannot pay the IRS. Your family just legally bankrupted themselves." I stared at Vivian, the magnitude of her words settling over me like a heavy, suffocating blanket of absolute vindication. "They bankrupted themselves." I repeated, my voice barely a whisper against the faint hum of city traffic filtering through the thick glass of the alcove. Vivian nodded, her manicured finger tapping a rapid rhythmic beat against the dense stack of legal filings in her hands. "Your father is a man obsessed with projecting wealth," she explained, her tone dripping with professional disdain. "But he is equally obsessed with never paying his fair share to maintain that illusion. When Calvin drafted the transfer of that Alaskan parcel, he was terrified the IRS would hit him with a massive capital gains or gift tax penalty, even for a property he deemed entirely worthless. He could not stomach the idea of writing a check to the federal government. So in his supreme arrogance, he cut corners." Vivian opened the binder and pulled out a secondary document highlighting a specific string of alphanumeric tax codes printed in the fine margins. "He bypassed standard familial property transfers and utilized a highly obscure, incredibly rigid federal tax loophole known as an absolute relinquishment clause," Vivian detailed. "To dodge a 30% federal gift tax penalty, Calvin legally swore under penalty of perjury to the United States government that the transfer was unconditional, permanent, and entirely irrevocable. He explicitly waived all future rights to contest reclaim or govern the asset in perpetuity." She leaned closer, her sharp eyes gleaming with predatory delight. "If Richard Sterling actually pushes this injunction in front of a sitting judge, he forces your father to formally challenge the deed. The exact moment your father challenges the deed, he instantly triggers a federal audit for tax fraud and perjury. He will be admitting on public record that he lied to the IRS to evade taxes. Sterling knows this. He knows the injunction is a ghost. It is entirely baseless, built on nothing but aggressive bluffing and the arrogant assumption that you are too intimidated to read the fine print. They assumed you would panic at the sight of a legal binder and cave to their demands." Vivian closed the folder with a sharp, satisfying snap. "We can walk back into that room right now, slide this tax filing directly across the glass, and watch Richard Sterling choke on his own fabricated litigation. We can crush them in 60 seconds. Let us end this." I looked at the heavy wooden door separating us from the mediation room. I pictured Jamal's smug, arrogant face. I pictured my mother weaponizing our race to defend a common thief. I pictured my father so blinded by his own ego that he accidentally trapped himself in his own snare. I thought about Jamal's vile confession just moments ago. He had laughed about stealing my college tuition. He had gloated about forging my signature to fund his frat parties and his doomed startup. My parents had known about his theft and actively covered it up, allowing me to struggle, drop classes, and work grueling double shifts to survive. They did not just tolerate his crimes, they underwrote them. A family that comfortable with fraud does not suddenly develop a conscience. I placed my hand flat over Vivian's on the binder. No, I said softly. My voice was steady, dropping into a cold, analytical register. We wait. Vivian frowned, her sharp eyes narrowing in confusion. Maya, we hold the kill switch. Why on earth would we prolong this? Because a quick death is not a permanent solution, I explained, pacing the small length of the soundproof alcove. You said it yourself. Jamal is facing a federal indictment. He is cornered, desperate, and entirely devoid of a moral compass. If we simply dismiss this injunction and walk away, he will not stop. Desperate men do not accept defeat gracefully. They regroup. If we shatter this bluff today, Sterling will just file a dozen new frivolous lawsuits tomorrow. They will tie me up in endless probate appeals, smear my name in the industry press, and bleed my energy dry. I refuse to spend the next decade looking over my shoulder, waiting for my family to launch another legal grenade to fund their counterfeit lifestyle. I turned back to the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking down at the crawling traffic of downtown Atlanta. I need them permanently neutralized. I need an insurance policy so bulletproof they will never dare to speak my name again. How do we get that? Vivian asked, her professional curiosity fully piqued. We need them to confess, I stated, turning to face her. We need them to explicitly admit on the official mediation record that they know the injunction is baseless. We need them to openly state that they are using the legal system maliciously to extort me into paying Jamal's criminal debts. Extortion is a felony. Malicious litigation is a disparable offense. Ms. Albright is a court-appointed mediator. She is a sworn officer of the court. Her notes and her testimony are legally binding. If they confess to blatant extortion in front of her, we have them on a silver platter. We will not just be defending my assets. We will be handing the Department of Justice the exact weapon they need to lock Jamal away and dismantle my father's entire financial empire. But to get that confession, I continued, my voice hardening, we have to make them feel invincible. Narcissists only tell the truth when they believe they have already won. We have to feed their egos until they gorge themselves on their own arrogance. I have to play the exact role they expect me to play. The broken, submissive, terrified daughter who finally realized she cannot beat the great Calvin Washington. I smoothed the fabric of my tailored skirt, taking a deep, stabilizing breath. I need them to put the gun directly to my head, and I need them to proudly admit that the gun is loaded with blackmail. Vivian's lips curved into a slow, dangerous smile. She understood the assignment perfectly. Follow my lead, I instructed. We walked back down the long, carpeted hallway. With every step toward the mediation room, I systematically dismantled the icy, untouchable armor I had worn all morning. I let my shoulders slump forward, stripping away the confident, upright posture of a successful corporate director. I allowed my breathing to become shallow, rapid, and erratic. I dug deep into the darkest, most painful corners of my memory. I thought about the sheer, agonizing betrayal of my entire life. I thought about the holidays where I was ignored, the accomplishments they belittled, the stolen tuition money, the cold abandonment at the steakhouse, and the terrifying reality that my own blood wanted to destroy me. I forced that authentic, crushing pain straight up to the surface. My chest tightened, my throat burned. By the time I pushed open the heavy glass door, my eyes were swimming with genuine, unshed tears. Ms. Albright looked up, her expression shifting to immediate professional concern. Jamal smirked, exchanging a triumphant look with Chloe. Calvin leaned back in his chair, radiating arrogant victory. I walked slowly to the table, my hands trembling visibly as I gripped the back of my leather chair. I looked at my parents, letting a single tear spill over my lashes and trace a hot path down my cheek. I let out a broken, defeated exhale. You win, I whispered, my voice cracking perfectly. I cannot afford a 10-year legal battle. I will sign over 50% of the contract. The heavy manufactured silence in the mediation room stretched for a single agonizing second before the illusion of my defeat worked its magic. Jamal actually slammed his fist down onto the glass table in a gesture of pure, unadulterated triumph. He let out a loud bark of laughter, leaning back in his chair and running a hand over his face. The sheer pathetic relief washing over him was almost difficult to look at. He was not a brilliant entrepreneur pulling off a strategic victory. He was a terrified child who had just been rescued from the consequences of his own disastrous actions. Beside him, Chloe let out a long, theatrical exhale. She immediately picked up her phone and began aggressively typing, no doubt texting her luxury real estate broker or her personal shopper to assure them that the funds were secured. Her designer handbag suddenly looked less like a life preserver and more like a trophy. Calvin did not celebrate loudly. He simply adjusted his tailored suit jacket and offered me a look of cold, paternal satisfaction. He believed he had successfully broken the rebellious daughter. He believed the natural order of the Washington family had been restored. Brenda, however, could not contain her smug superiority. She offered a tight, condescending smile. "I knew you would finally see reason," Maya Brenda stated, her tone dripping with toxic benevolence. "This is what family does. We protect our own. You are making the right choice for the Washington legacy. When you look back on this, you will realize that 50% is more than enough for a single woman with your modest lifestyle." Vivian played her part flawlessly. She sat rigidly beside me, her jaw clenched, radiating professional outrage. She leaned close to my ear, whispering loud enough for Richard Sterling to catch the tail end of her warning. "You do not have to do this," Vivian hissed, sounding genuinely frantic. "We can fight this injunction. Do not let them bully you into liquidation." I shook my head, keeping my eyes fixed firmly on the polished glass table. My hands remained trembling in my lap. "I am tired, Vivian," I whispered, projecting absolute exhaustion. "I just want it to be over. I want them to leave me alone." Sterling did not waste a single second. He immediately reached into his briefcase and produced a pristine, freshly printed settlement agreement. He slid it across the table alongside a heavy silver pen. "Sign here, Ms. Washington," Sterling commanded, tapping the signature line. "The funds will be transferred into the family trust within 48 hours of the initial disbursement from the electric vehicle manufacturer. Litigation will be formally dropped by Friday morning." I looked at the silver pen. I let my hand hover over it for a fraction of a second before pulling it back. I looked up, wiping a perfectly timed tear from my cheek, and met my father's gaze. "I will give you the 50%, I said, my voice quiet but laced with a sudden, immovable stubbornness. "But I will not sign this document in a dingy back room like some dirty, shameful secret." Calvin frowned, his thick eyebrows pulling together. "What are you talking about?" "Just sign the paper, Maya. If I am surrendering $33 million to save this family, I am doing it on my own terms," I stated, sitting up slightly straighter. "I want to sign the settlement publicly. My environmental firm is hosting the annual Black Excellence Gala this Saturday night at the Botanical Gardens. Every major political figure, corporate investor, and media outlet in Atlanta will be in attendance." I shifted my gaze to Brenda, knowing exactly which psychological buttons to press. "You want the family image intact?" I asked, my voice trembling with feigned vulnerability. "You want everyone in your country club to know that the Washingtons are a united, impenetrable front. You want to prove that Jamal is a brilliant backed entrepreneur and not a failing fraud. We do it in front of the cameras. I will invite you as my VIP guests. I will bring you on stage during my keynote address. I will sign the transfer documents under the lights, and we will smile for the press. We will show the entire city exactly how powerful this family is." Sterling immediately shook his head, holding up a hand to stop the momentum. "Absolutely not," Sterling warned, his legal instincts flaring. "My clients will not participate in a public spectacle. We execute the agreement here and now in a controlled legal environment." But Richard Sterling was a lawyer. He was not a Washington. He fundamentally underestimated the crippling, obsessive vanity of my parents. Calvin raised his hand, silencing his own attorney. He looked at Brenda. The unspoken communication between them was electric. Brenda's eyes were practically gleaming. The Black Excellence Gala was the premier social event of the season. She had spent years trying to secure prime seating at that specific event, to network with the absolute top tier of Atlanta's elite, to not only attend as a VIP guest, but to be brought on stage while her daughter publicly handed over a fortune. It was the ultimate social flex. It was the absolute pinnacle of her narcissistic fantasies. She would be able to parade her golden boy in front of the cameras, funded and untouchable, while showing high society that she had successfully brought her rebellious, independent daughter to heel. Calvin saw it too. He saw the headlines. He saw the business contacts he could leverage. He saw the absolute validation of his patriarchal authority. "We will do it your way," Calvin agreed, his voice echoing with arrogant finality. "Saturday night, on stage. You present the documents, you sign them, and you smile." Sterling looked horrified. "Calvin, I strongly advise against delaying the execution of these documents. You leave yourself exposed to—" "I said we will do it," Calvin barked, shutting Sterling down completely. "My daughter wants to make a gesture of family unity. I am going to allow her to make that gesture. Bring the papers to the Gala Maya. Do not disappoint us again." I lowered my head, staring at the glass table to hide the absolute predatory satisfaction burning in my eyes. "I will see you on Saturday," I whispered. The preparation. The next 48 hours were a blur of calculated, precise execution. Vivian and I retreated to our operational war room, locking the doors and drafting the blueprints for the most spectacular corporate execution Atlanta had ever seen. My parents thought they were walking into a coronation. They had no idea they were walking onto a meticulously rigged scaffold. By Friday evening, the night before the gala, the trap was fully constructed. The ballroom at the Botanical Gardens was draped in gold and black velvet. The press passes were approved. The VIP seating chart was finalized, placing the Washington family at the absolute center table, surrounded by the wealthiest and most influential figures in the state. I sat alone in my dark apartment, the glow of my laptop illuminating my face. I had 3 final critical moves to make before the curtain went up. I picked up my phone and dialed a private unlisted Seattle area code. The line rang twice before a sharp, authoritative voice answered. "Miss Washington," the CEO of the electric vehicle conglomerate stated. "I assume you are calling regarding the temporary injunction filed against your holding company. My legal team was quite displeased to find our extraction rights currently frozen in probate." "I understand your concern," I replied, my voice steady and professional. "I am calling to personally guarantee that the injunction is a baseless intimidation tactic filed by a hostile third party. It holds absolutely no legal merit." "I need more than assurances, Maya. I have a board of directors demanding a clean title by Monday morning, or we pull our capital and walk away." "You will have a clean title by tomorrow night," I promised, my tone vibrating with absolute certainty. "The hostile party will be publicly withdrawing their claims on the record. I am inviting you to tune in to the live broadcast of the Black Excellence Gala tomorrow evening at 9 o'clock Eastern. You will want your legal team watching. The extraction rights will be permanently secured." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. The CEO was a ruthless operator. She recognized a tactical strike when she heard one. "I will have my team monitoring the broadcast," the CEO finally agreed. "Do not miss." I ended the call and immediately dialed the second number on my list. This one routed directly to a secure government line in Washington, D.C. "Special Agent Miller," the gruff voice answered. "Agent Miller, this is Maya Washington," I stated clearly. "I am calling regarding your ongoing investigation into Jamal Washington and his logistics startup." The line went completely silent. Federal agents do not confirm or deny active investigations, but the heavy breathing on the other end told me I had his absolute attention. "I have reason to believe the target is actively attempting to secure $33 million through extortion to cover up his wire fraud and satisfy his federal tax liens." I continued feeding the agent the exact bait he needed. "The target will be attending the Black Excellence Gala at the Atlanta Botanical Gardens tomorrow evening. At exactly 9:15, he will be on a hot microphone on a public stage, openly admitting to his financial restructuring and coercion tactics." I paused, letting the magnitude of the intelligence sink in. "I suggest you have agents in the room," I added softly. "He will be wearing a custom-tailored tuxedo. You will not want to miss his confession." I hung up before the agent could ask a single question. The federal government did not need an invitation to a crime scene. They just needed the coordinates. I pulled up the final number on my screen. It was the direct office line for the general manager of the Prime Steakhouse where my family had launched their initial ambush. "Marcus, it is Maya Washington," I said when he answered. Maya, the manager, greeted warmly. "It is wonderful to hear from you. How can I help you this evening?" "Marcus, I need a massive favor," I explained, keeping my voice calm but urgent. "During my family dinner in your private dining room 2 weeks ago, an incident occurred. I need the high-definition security footage from that specific room. The camera positioned directly above the wine racks. I need the exact timestamp from when my ex-fiancé walked out the door to the moment my father slammed his hands on the table." "Maya, you know company policy prohibits releasing internal security footage without a subpoena," Marcus said, his tone turning apologetic but firm. "I am well aware of the policy, Marcus. But I am also aware that your restaurant is catering the VIP reception for the gala tomorrow night. A gala where I am the keynote speaker and where I personally approved your catering contract over 3 other competitors." I let the silence hang, allowing the professional leverage to settle comfortably around his neck. "I am not asking for the footage for a lawsuit," I clarified smoothly. "I am asking for it because I am creating a special multimedia presentation for my speech. It is a presentation about family loyalty and overcoming obstacles. It would be a shame if technical difficulties forced me to publicly mention my disappointment with the catering management during my address." Marcus cleared his throat, the sound loud in the quiet receiver. "I will have the encrypted video file sent to your personal email within 10 minutes, Ms. Washington." "Thank you, Marcus. I look forward to seeing your team tomorrow." I disconnected the call and set the phone down on my desk. My pulse was a steady, rhythmic drumbeat in my ears. The board was set. The pieces were locked into position. The federal government, the corporate billionaires, and the local media were all aiming their lenses directly at the center stage. My family wanted a public spectacle. They wanted to show the world how they handled a rebellious daughter. Tomorrow night, I was going to give them exactly what they asked for. The Atlanta Botanical Gardens had been transformed into an absolute masterpiece of modern luxury. Golden light cascaded across the vaulted glass ceilings of the main conservatory, illuminating the exotic orchids and manicured greenery that surrounded the ballroom floor. The Black Excellence Gala was the crown jewel of the city's corporate social calendar, and tonight the room was packed with the most ruthless, influential, and deeply connected power players in the state. Hundreds of elite venture capitalists, industry titans, and high-profile media personalities mingled under the crystal chandeliers. Waitstaff in crisp black uniforms circulated with trays of vintage champagne and beluga caviar. The ambient hum of wealth and privilege vibrated through the room, punctuated by the constant rhythmic flashing of press cameras documenting every high society handshake. And right in the absolute center of it all, soaking up the attention like parched earth, was my family. They arrived 45 minutes late to ensure they made a grand entrance. The moment the heavy mahogany doors swung open, the unholy quartet strutted into the ballroom, projecting the arrogant, entitled energy of conquering royalty. Brenda was draped in a custom emerald green Oscar de la Renta gown that easily cost $15,000. A blinding diamond tennis necklace rested against her collarbone, catching the light with every condescending nod she gave to the crowd. Calvin marched beside her in a bespoke Tom Ford tuxedo, his chest puffed out, shaking hands with state senators and bank executives as if he owned the entire building. Jamal and Chloe trailed right behind them, playing the roles of the tragic, triumphant young heirs perfectly. Chloe was dripping in newly acquired Cartier, her previous panic entirely erased by the promise of my bank account. Jamal wore a velvet dinner jacket and a smug, untouchable grin. He was actively holding court by the ice sculpture, loudly bragging to a group of local investors about a massive restructuring his logistics app was about to undergo. They were dripping in fresh, exorbitant couture. I knew exactly what they had done. The second I walked out of that mediation room yesterday, Calvin and Brenda must have opened massive new lines of credit, borrowing aggressively against the $33 million they assumed I was handing over tonight. They were spending my ghost money to celebrate their victory over me. The moment I watched them from the elevated VIP balcony, a glass of sparkling water resting coolly in my palm. My pulse was a steady, rhythmic drumbeat of absolute focus. I was wearing a floor-length tailored black gown with a sharp geometric neckline that felt more like battle armor than evening wear. Vivian stood silently to my right, clutching a thick leather binder against her chest. She gave me a single sharp nod. It was time. The heavy bass of the ambient music faded out, replaced by a smooth instrumental transition. The lights in the main ballroom dimmed dramatically, casting the outer edges of the room into shadow and pulling a brilliant white spotlight directly onto the center stage. A polite hush fell over the hundreds of guests as the master of ceremonies stepped to the microphone, delivering a glowing introduction about my environmental firm and the groundbreaking work we had done over the past 5 years. When he finally announced my name, the room erupted into thunderous, genuine applause. I walked down the sweeping staircase and took the stage. The heat of the spotlight hit my face, but I did not blink. I looked out over the sea of faces, letting the applause wash over me, before holding up a hand to quiet the room. "Thank you," I projected, my voice ringing clear and authoritative through the massive speakers. "We are here tonight to celebrate innovation, resilience, and the power of legacy. For years, I have worked to build a company that honors the fundamental values of integrity and forward thinking. But none of us reach these heights entirely alone. We are shaped by the forces that raise us. We are defined by our families." I paused, letting the heavy emotional weight of my words settle over the silent ballroom. Out in the center of the crowd, I saw my mother dab the corner of her eye with a tissue. She was eating it up. She actually believed I was giving her a public tribute. "Tonight is an incredibly significant milestone." I continued, my gaze locking directly onto Calvin and Brenda. "My family is here with me this evening to finalize a major life-altering business transition. We have reached an agreement that will officially close the door on the past and set the course for the future of the Washington name. I would like to invite my parents, Calvin and Brenda Washington, and my brother Jamal to join me up here to finalize this transition in front of the community that has supported us so deeply." The applause swelled again. Brenda practically shoved an older gentleman out of the way as she grabbed Calvin's arm and marched toward the stage stairs. Jamal followed close behind, fixing his cuffs, looking like he was about to accept an Academy Award. They climbed the steps and moved directly into the spotlight beside me. The press photographers rushed to the edge of the stage, their cameras firing off a blinding barrage of flashes. Calvin reached into his tuxedo jacket and pulled out the thick, cream-colored settlement documents Richard Sterling had drafted. He held them up slightly, making sure the cameras caught the heavy legal binding, projecting the image of a powerful patriarch, securing his legacy. Jamal stepped up to my left, reaching into his pocket and producing a heavy gold-plated fountain pen. He held it out to me, his lips pulled back into a cruel, mocking whisper that only I could hear over the applause. "Be a good girl and sign away your life, Maya." Jamal sneered under his breath. "Try not to ruin the pictures." The drop. I looked at the gold pen in his extended hand. I let the silence on the stage stretch for 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. The applause in the room began to falter, tapering off into a confused, heavy quiet. The flashing of the cameras slowed. The elite crowd realized that something was suddenly terribly wrong with the picture-perfect family tableau. I did not take the pen. I did not look at the settlement papers. I turned my head slightly and gave a sharp, definitive nod toward the heavy velvet curtains at the edge of the stage. Vivian stepped out of the shadows. She was not smiling. She walked onto the stage with the predatory grace of a great white shark, completely ignoring Calvin's sudden, sharp frown. She did not have the settlement papers. She was holding a massive black embossed portfolio. She stepped between Jamal and me, physically blocking my brother, as she handed the portfolio directly into my waiting hands. I turned back to the microphone, my eyes sweeping over the crowd, until I found the specific table where the executives from the Seattle-based electric vehicle conglomerate were sitting. They were staring at me with laser focus. "I am thrilled to announce to all of you tonight," I said, my voice echoing like a crack of thunder through the dead, silent ballroom, "that after a brief, entirely baseless administrative delay, I am officially signing the $67 million exclusive rights contract with the Apex EV conglomerate." A wave of shocked, excited murmurs ripped through the crowd. $67 million was a staggering figure even for this room. Beside me, I heard Calvin let out a sharp, choked gasp. Brenda's hand flew to her diamond necklace. Jamal dropped his arm, the gold pen slipping from his fingers and hitting the stage floor with a hollow clatter. I opened the black portfolio, uncapped my own pen, and signed my name on the bottom line with absolute vicious precision. I held the signed contract up for the cameras staring directly into the flashing lights. "I am executing this transfer," I announced, my voice dropping into a register of absolute terrifying finality, as the sole uncontested and permanent owner of the Alaskan Reserve. The words had barely left my mouth before the absolute reality of his financial ruin shattered Jamal's fragile, arrogant facade. He lunged. He practically threw himself across the polished stage, his velvet dinner jacket catching the glare of the spotlight as he dove for the microphone stand. I took a single calm step back, allowing him to grab the metal pole. A sharp, piercing screech of audio feedback ripped through the ballroom, making several front-row investors wince and cover their ears. "She is lying," Jamal screamed into the microphone, his voice cracking with pure, unadulterated panic. Sweat was already beading on his forehead, ruining his perfectly groomed aesthetic. "Do not take pictures of that document. The deal is frozen. She is breaking a legally binding agreement. That land belongs to the Washington Family Trust. There is a state injunction. She cannot sell it." The ballroom descended into a chaotic murmur. 500 of Atlanta's wealthiest power players, venture capitalists, and media executives began whispering furiously. Camera flashes fired in rapid succession, capturing Jamal red-faced and unhinged, gripping the microphone like a drowning man. Chloe stood frozen near the edge of the stage, her hands covering her mouth in absolute horror, as the high society elite she so desperately worshipped watched her husband completely unravel. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. I simply stepped back up to the microphone, standing shoulder to shoulder with my frantic, sweating brother. "There is no family trust, Jamal," I stated, my voice cutting through his hysteria with surgical precision. "And as of this morning, there is no injunction." Jamal's eyes darted wildly toward Calvin, silently begging their father to fix it, to use his patriarchal authority to somehow rewind time and force me back into submission. But Calvin was completely paralyzed, staring at the signed Apex contract in my hands as if it were a venomous snake. I turned my attention away from my brother and looked directly at the massive projection booth suspended at the back of the ballroom. I raised my right hand high into the air and snapped my fingers. The 20-foot LED screen spanning the entire back wall of the stage flared to life with blinding intensity. The ambient lighting in the ballroom instantly dropped to pitch black, forcing every single eye in the venue to focus entirely on the massive display behind us. A high-definition security video filled the screens. In the top right corner, a crisp white timestamp ticked away, dating the footage exactly 6 months ago. The image was crystal clear. It was the private dining room at the Prime Steakhouse. The crowd watched in absolute silence as the footage played out like a silent film, showing my former fiancé standing up, tossing his napkin onto his plate, and walking out the heavy wooden door without looking back. Then the audio kicked in. It was piped directly through the gala's surround sound speakers, echoing off the glass ceilings of the botanical gardens with flawless, inescapable clarity. The entire ballroom heard the violent, unmistakable sound of Calvin Washington slamming his hands flat against the steakhouse table. The camera zoomed in on his face, capturing the sheer, unmasked cruelty distorting his features. Then my father's voice boomed across the silent, packed venue. "Give her the worthless cabin. She is dead to this family anyway." A collective visceral gasp ripped through the audience. I looked down into the front row and saw a prominent state senator literally drop her champagne glass. The crystal shattered against the floor, but nobody looked away from the stage. Brenda let out a sharp, horrified squeak. She brought both hands to her face, desperately trying to shield herself from the blinding flashes of the press cameras that were now swarming the stage, documenting her public humiliation in real time. Calvin took a stumbling step backward, his face draining of all color. He opened his mouth, searching for a defense, a spin, a business lie that could save him. He found nothing. But I was not finished. That was 6 months ago I announced my voice completely devoid of mercy. That was the moment my father permanently transferred his absolute irrevocable ownership of the Alaskan Reserve to me, simply because he believed it was a toxic liability. But the Washington family only believes in family loyalty when there is a profit to be extracted. I signaled the booth again. The screens went pitch black. A single glowing audio waveform appeared in the center of the monitors. This was recorded 48 hours ago, inside a legally sanctioned mediation room, I stated clearly. Let us hear exactly why my family attempted to freeze my assets. The audio began to play. The acoustics of the soundproof mediation room made the recording chillingly intimate. Jamal's voice echoed through the grand ballroom, stripped of his usual public relations polish, dripping with toxic, unearned arrogance. I forged your signature on the withdrawal slips. Mom and Dad found out 2 days later. And you know what they did? They covered for me. They told you the investments took a hit because they knew my startup was more important than your pointless environmental science degree. You have always been the sacrifice, Maya. You are just the stepping stone. Sign the papers. The silence in the ballroom was so absolute, so profoundly heavy, that you could hear the gentle hum of the air conditioning units. The elite crowd was paralyzed collectively, witnessing a prominent wealthy family publicly confess to financial theft, forgery, and parental complicity. But the recording was not over. The audio waveform spiked violently, shifting into a shrill, hysterical pitch that everyone in the room instantly recognized. It was Brenda. Her voice vibrated through the massive speakers, completely unhinged and dripping with malicious intent. We are going to tie this property up until you are bankrupt. You are going to sign over that contract right now. We need that $33 million to pay off his federal tax liens before the Department of Justice files formal wire fraud charges. You owe this to the family name. We are not letting him go to federal prison. You are going to pay his debts. The audio cut out with a sharp, definitive click. The massive screens went dark. The bright white stage lights slowly faded back up, illuminating the absolute devastation I had just unleashed. I looked down into the center of the room. Sitting at a shadowed table near the back exit, 2 men in dark, unremarkable suits stood up simultaneously. Special Agent Miller had received my invitation. The federal government was in the building, and they had just been handed a recorded, verified confession of wire fraud, tax evasion, and active extortion. Jamal realized it at the exact same moment. He looked out into the crowd, his eyes tracking the movement of the federal agents. His knees buckled. He stumbled sideways, grabbing onto the edge of the speaker podium just to keep himself from collapsing onto the floor. He looked like a man watching his own execution. I turned my attention to the side of the stage. Standing near the velvet curtain, clutching a heavy leather briefcase to his chest, was Richard Sterling. The notorious untouchable corporate shark was absolutely sweating through his bespoke suit. He was staring at the massive screens with a look of pure, unadulterated terror. He was a seasoned attorney. He knew exactly what had just happened. He had actively facilitated a mediation session where his clients openly admitted to weaponizing a temporary injunction to extort $33 million to cover up federal tax fraud. He had filed those injunctions. His signature was on the paperwork. The Department of Justice agents were currently walking toward the stage, and the entire city's media apparatus was broadcasting the evidence live. Sterling was not just looking at a lost lawsuit. He was looking at malicious prosecution, aiding and abetting extortion, and an immediate, permanent disbarment. Our eyes locked across the stage. I offered him a single cold, knowing smile. Sterling did not say a word. His survival instincts entirely overrode his retainer fee. He opened his hand. His heavy leather briefcase slipped from his fingers, hitting the polished wooden floor with a loud, heavy thud. He turned on his heel, shoved his way through the stunned catering staff near the kitchen exit, and literally ran out of the botanical gardens, abandoning his clients on a live stage in front of 500 witnesses. Richard Sterling's frantic footsteps echoed faintly over the low murmur of the stunned ballroom, but his cowardly retreat was instantly overshadowed by the heavy, deliberate thud of polished dress shoes ascending the stage stairs. Special Agent Miller did not rush. He did not need to. He moved with the slow, terrifying certainty of a man who held all the cards. Two other agents flanked him, their federal badges catching the glare of the spotlights. Jamal stumbled backward, hitting the master of ceremonies podium. The microphone screeched again, but no one flinched. The entire room, packed with the absolute upper echelon of Atlanta society, watched in breathless silence. Jamal Washington, Agent Miller, announced, his gruff voice projecting clearly across the stage without the need for a microphone. "You are under arrest for federal wire fraud, extortion, and tax evasion." Jamal's face drained of all color, transforming into a sickly pale mask of absolute terror. He threw a desperate, pleading look at our father. "Dad, tell them this is a mistake, do something." But Calvin Washington, the great patriarch, the man who had spent his entire life projecting an image of impenetrable power, did the only thing a true coward knows how to do. He took a physical step away from his son. He held his hands up, palms facing outward, desperate to sever his physical and legal proximity to the sinking ship. He knew that the audio recordings just played had implicated him, but self-preservation completely overrode his paternal instincts. Agent Miller grabbed Jamal by the shoulder, spinning him around. "We have the bank records regarding the Miami property, Mr. Washington. We know about the shell companies. We know about the federal tax liens. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The metallic click of the handcuffs echoing across the stage was the sharpest, most beautiful sound I had ever heard. Chloe broke first. The illusion of her glamorous, wealthy lifestyle shattered in real time. She looked at Jamal, now slumped in federal custody, and then looked down at her hands dripping in the Cartier jewelry she had bought on credit just hours earlier. Panic, raw and completely selfish, contorted her face. She realized instantly that the money was gone, the status was gone, and the man she had tied herself to was heading to a federal penitentiary. "No!" Chloe screamed, her voice shrill and echoing through the silent ballroom. "No, I am not doing this. I am not going down with you." She frantically yanked the massive diamond engagement ring off her finger. With a sharp, furious motion, she threw the ring directly at Jamal's chest. It bounced off his velvet dinner jacket and clattered onto the stage floor. "I did not sign up to be a prisoner's wife," Chloe spat, her face twisted in absolute disgust. She hitched up the skirt of her designer gown, turned on her heel, and sprinted down the side stairs, shoving past the federal agents to escape the venue. I did not watch her leave. My attention had already shifted. I turned and walked slowly down the center stairs, the heavy velvet of my gown sweeping gracefully across the steps. The crowd parted for me like the Red Sea, local politicians and corporate titans physically stepping aside out of sheer respect and awe. I moved with steady, unbothered precision until I reached the back of the VIP section. Standing near a towering floral arrangement, trying desperately to blend into the shadows, was Trey. My former fiancé had managed to sneak his way into the gala, no doubt utilizing an old press pass or begging a low-level vendor for entry, hoping to network his failing logistics startup with the billionaires in attendance. Instead, he had walked directly into the front row of my absolute victory. He looked terrified, his eyes darting frantically toward the exit. I locked eyes with him, stopping dead in my tracks. I let him feel the full, crushing weight of his irrelevance. Standing directly beside me was Sarah, the ruthless CEO of the Apex EV conglomerate. She had just secured her extraction rights and watched me execute the most masterful corporate slaughter in Atlanta history. She held a glass of champagne, looking highly entertained. I leaned slightly toward her, never breaking eye contact with Trey. "Sarah," I said casually, my voice carrying just enough volume to ensure Trey heard every single syllable. "I understand Apex recently acquired a small logistics startup for their back-end supply chain. I believe that man standing right over there is the founder." Sarah glanced over at Trey, her expression turning immediately critical. I feel compelled to mention I continued, smoothing a tiny invisible wrinkle from my gown. "He has a well-documented history of severe unprofessional temperament and questionable financial ethics. A liability to any corporate structure." Sarah's eyes narrowed into slits of cold corporate calculation. She looked Trey up and down with absolute disdain, absorbing my warning completely. She pulled her phone from her clutch and made a mental note that I knew would translate into a swift, brutal action. She glared at Trey with the distinct icy look of an executive who was planning to terminate an employee the second the offices opened on Monday morning. Trey's shoulders sagged. The final shred of his arrogant ambition evaporated. He backed away slowly, turning and slipping out the side door, utterly defeated. With the loose ends tied, I turned my attention back to the center stage. The federal agents were actively escorting a sobbing, handcuffed Jamal down the steps. The flash photography from the press pit was blinding, capturing the Washington family's golden boy doing a perp walk in front of the entire city. Left completely alone under the harsh glare of the spotlight were Calvin and Brenda. They were completely humiliated. Their carefully curated social standing was entirely annihilated. Every country club member, every political ally, and every corporate sponsor they had spent decades manipulating had just watched them get exposed as abusive, extortionist frauds. They were ruined. I walked back toward the stage, stopping at the base of the stairs. Brenda looked down at me, her face a streaked, ruined mess of expensive mascara and genuine panic. She was shaking uncontrollably. Calvin stood beside her, his shoulders hunched, looking 20 years older than he had when he walked into the room. Brenda sobbed, her voice cracking with desperate, pathetic begging. Maya, please. You have the money. You signed the contract. You have $67 million. Please, you have to help us. You have to hire him a lawyer. You have to pay his bail. Please, Maya, we are your family. Calvin looked at me, his eyes wide and pleading, completely stripped of his arrogant patriarchal authority. He had nothing left to leverage. He was begging a woman he had spent a lifetime trying to break. I looked at them. I did not feel anger. I did not feel sadness. I felt absolutely nothing but a cold, clear, immaculate peace. I opened my designer clutch and reached inside. I pulled out a single crisp $100 bill. I walked up the first 2 steps, reached out, and pressed the bill directly into my mother's trembling, manicured hand. For your Uber home, I stated, my voice ringing out with crystal-clear finality. Try to plan better next time. I did not wait for a response. I turned my back on them and walked away. I strode straight down the center aisle of the ballroom, my head held high, my posture impeccable. The applause began slowly at first, a scattered clapping from the venture capitalists who appreciated a ruthless power play, before swelling into a roaring standing ovation from the entire room. I did not smile. I simply nodded to the crowd, absorbing the respect I had earned in blood, sweat, and absolute strategy. I pushed through the heavy mahogany doors and stepped out into the cool, crisp Atlanta night. A sleek black chauffeured Maybach was already idling at the curb, the engine purring softly. The driver immediately stepped out and opened the rear door for me. I slid into the luxurious leather interior, adjusting my gown as the door clicked shut behind me, sealing me inside a quiet, impenetrable fortress of my own making. My $67 million was completely secure. My dignity was utterly untouched. And for the first time in my 30 years on this earth, my future belonged entirely to me. I looked out the tinted window as the Maybach pulled away from the botanical gardens, leaving the flashing police lights and the complete wreckage of the Washington family legacy far behind in the rearview mirror. I did not shed a single tear. The screen fades to black. The greatest lesson learned from the wreckage of this family's legacy is that your worth is never defined by those who try to diminish you. True power doesn't come from seeking validation from toxic people, even if they share your blood. It comes from building your own empire, setting immovable boundaries, and having the courage to walk away from abuse without a single ounce of guilt. Sometimes the most beautiful chapters of your life begin when you leave the toxic ones firmly behind. Please share your own stories of boundary setting in the comments, like, and subscribe with us today.